starting in a few minutes' time. Hi everybody. Welcome to the Darwin Railway Club. It's great to see everybody here. I'm just going to hand over to Louise Woodward to do an acknowledgement of a brief acknowledgement of country.
Thank you. I might just get are those guys out there able to turn down the music? Thank you. So before we start, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this beautiful land that we are gathering on, the 9 Larrakia families, who we all stand in solidarity with in protecting country. And certainly the subjects that we're going to be talking about today relate directly to the protection of the country where we are so lucky to live. And so I'd like to acknowledge all the traditional owners as well as the young leaders coming up through the ranks, and we feel so privileged to be able to work with many of them, and I say thank you so much to anyone in the audience who is joining us today.
Great, thanks Louise, and I'd also just like to echo that acknowledgement of the traditional owners and pay our respects to their current and past and future leaders. thanks everybody for coming. I'm Mark Ogge from the Australia Institute. I'm Principal Advisor at the Australia Institute, and I've been up to Darwin a few times talking about these issues, and they're for the NT economy, and we'll be covering a lot of those issues tonight. Now, a lot of you may have, or some of you might have seen that we originally advertised this event as a debate with Australian energy producers, AEP, who are the gas industry lobby group. So AEP represent big multinational gas companies who export gas from the Northern Territory and around Australia. They contacted us, asked to be involved, and then backed out late last week, unfortunately. So we're really disappointed that they're
thousands of tonnes of really toxic chemicals called volatile organic compounds. And they've been releasing these thousands of tonnes with basic impunity, with no accountability from the EPA. An example is in 2022, Inpex released 11,000 tonnes of volatile organic compounds into the air over Darwin. For comparison, the US does not allow companies to release more than 250 tonnes per year. Inpex released 11,000 tonnes. We don't know why the rates are so high, but we suspect that they are not using technology to reduce the rates of VOCs being emitted from their factories like they should be doing. To do before they set up their LNG plant, they promised to use technology to make their pollution safer, and they're not doing that, and the EPA is not holding them to account. They are continuing to act with impunity, and this is something that really, really concerns me, because the government seems to be ignoring this issue, and we actually do not know what the risk is for Territorians, because there is no monitoring of air toxics in our city. So we actually don't know what the concentration of these volatile organic compounds are. And these are the exact compounds that cause all those health impacts that I've just discussed. I also worry about the workers on Inpex. We talk about these jobs and how amazing it is to get all these jobs for the gas industry, but what about the workers that are working on the Inpex plant and their exposure to these thousands of tonnes of toxic chemicals? And so I guess in terms of all of us here, I think it is really important for us to gather as a community and actually put pressure on our elected representatives to actually take our interests seriously, and to hold these companies to account, to measure the toxins in the air as they should be doing, which is, as per Australian regulations, they should be measuring these things and they're not. We get a free pass then from the NT because it's too expensive to measure it. But this is unacceptable. And I think all of us have an election to vote in on the 24th of August, and I think everyone should think very carefully about where their vote is going, and who really cares about their health.
Great, thanks, Louise. And we'll have questions at the end. So I'll talk a little bit now about the economics, and Rob will come in after me, and then we'll just have general Q&A where people can ask whatever they'd like of any of the speakers. So the Northern Territory, so the perception is that the Northern Territory is a huge gas exporter, right? In fact, the Northern Territory doesn't export any gas. The gas is exported, it's Australian gas, and it's exported by two big multinational oil and gas companies, Inpex and Santos. And that's a really important distinction to make, because what the gas industry tries to do is portray what they're doing as what we're doing, right? Make us think that we're big gas exporters because to encourage the idea that we get the benefits, right? They're trying to do what they want to do, which is sell a whole lot of gas and make a whole lot of money and make us feel like we're all part of it. But it's really important to understand that Territorians, like a huge amount of gas, is exported from the Northern Territory, but it's not Territorians exporting it. It's these massive multinational oil and gas entities. So it's a huge amount of gas. Over the last few years, Inpex and Santos have sold gas, Australian gas, overseas for about $9 billion each year. And that, for context, that is considerably more than the entire budget of the Northern Territory, including Commonwealth grants. It's an absolutely enormous amount of money. So you would think that that given there's this, they're making so much money
from selling this gas that belongs to Territorians and Australians, that some of the benefits would flow through to us, right? So how much do you think they're being charged for the gas? Remember, this gas belongs to Australians and Territorians. And the answer is, they're not being charged anything. Our governments are giving the gas away to these companies for free. Now our governments are, we employ our governments, we pay our governments, and the idea is that our governments represent our interests. They're meant to, when they're selling our natural resources, they're meant to get the best possible deal for us for the sale of our natural resources. And instead of doing that, they're actually giving it to these companies. An analogy would be, if you're selling your house and you went to an estate agent and you said, and you trusted that person to sell the gas and get the best possible price for you to represent your interests, and the agent gave the house away for free to a mate, right? You would be angry. You would be really angry. And you should be angry about what's happening with the gas, because it's exactly the same thing. Our governments have lost sight of who they're representing, and it's really important to understand that the interests of the gas industry, the interests of these big companies, do not align with the interests of Territorians and Australians. The interest of Australians and Territorians is to have a plentiful supply of gas for our own needs at a reasonable price, to ensure that the environment and our health isn't endangered, or the dangers and impacts are absolutely minimised, and to get a return for the sale of our natural resources. The interests of these companies are to export as much gas as possible, to charge us as much as they can for the gas that they provide to us, to pay the least amount of tax possible and royalties possible, and to have the minimum amount of regulation. And that's exactly what's happening at the moment. And it's not just that the federal government is giving our gas away for free. There's a tax specifically designed, a federal tax specifically designed to tax the oil and gas industries, in particular the export industries. It's called the Petroleum Resource Rent Tax. And none of these companies that export gas as liquefied natural gas from Australia have ever paid the Petroleum Resource Rent Tax. They have never paid it. A gas that's specifically designed to tax them. This is a quote from Treasury in last year's budget. To date, not a single LNG project has paid any petroleum resource rent tax, and many are not expected to pay significant amounts until into the 2030s. So they get the gas for free, and they don't pay the tax that should apply to them. The other tax that they should pay, like any other company, is company tax. The Australian Taxation Office has labelled them, the oil and gas industry, as systematic non-payers of tax. Now, it varies from year to year how much tax these companies pay, and from company to company. But a few years ago, so in 2020 to 2021, if you paid more than $30 income tax, you paid more income tax than Chevron, Woodside, Shell, Exxon, Inpex, Santos and APLNG paid on $59 billion of income. So they're getting the gas for free, they're not paying any petroleum resource rent tax, and often they don't pay any company tax as well. So what about the Northern Territory? A little bit of gas pays royalties to the Northern Territory government. It's onshore gas and it's from Central Petroleum, and it adds up to $2.6 million a year. That's million with an M. This is what I'm showing you here is the taxes on is the Northern Territory government taxes that make up the budget. On top of this, there's also Commonwealth government grants. So there's mining royalties, taxes on employers, taxes on property, gambling, vehicle rego, insurance, and petroleum royalties. The petroleum royalties is very hard to see because it's so small, right? It turns out, and if we compare it to the smallest of these, vehicle registration, turns out that Northern Territory drivers collectively pay 30 times more revenue, 30 times more than the gas industry pays in royalties to the Northern Territory government. So the gas industry contributes virtually no revenue to the Northern Territory government, to the Northern Territory, I should say. The government will argue that, well, if we have fracking, it will pay royalties. And that's true. They will pay some royalties. And fortunately, the government also undertook modelling to figure out how much royalties they'd pay. And this was done for the fracking inquiry in 2017. And the modelling showed that under the most optimistic scenario, in terms of raising revenue, the royalties from fracking would be $67 million a year. So well and truly less than 1% of total budget revenue, which is about $7 billion a year. So what they're proposing is to frack the territory to transform huge areas of the territory into an industrial gas field, build this massive thing in Darwin Harbour to increase revenue by about 1%. Right? That is an extraordinary thing to do. That is an extraordinary cost to pay for a small amount of money that could come from a huge range of other sources. And that's the most optimistic scenario. The other big justification that you often hear from the gas industry is that they employ a lot of people. They employ about 0.5% of the Northern Territory workforce. Now, they often argue that they employ many times more people than that in terms of indirect jobs. Actually, I'll just take a step back here. So just to put it into context, the health industry employs about 20 times more people than the oil and gas industry. You can see the oil and gas industry is in red. It's about 1,000 people, or somewhere between 500 and 1,000 people. The health industry is 23,000 or something like that. So the health industry employs about 25 times more people. Education is about 20 times more people. You never hear the health or education industries talking about how many people they employ. Right? Isn't that strange? Has anybody ever heard them advertising or doing PR on how many people they employ? And yet the gas industry does it all the time. And the government always talks about jobs in the gas industry. And the reason is they're trying to get their projects approved and they're conscious that they hardly employ anyone, so they feel the need to advertise and to bang on about it endlessly in the media and in advertising. Now, the gas industry say that they support 6 times as many jobs as that. They say it's about 6,000 jobs. So how does that work? Well, they use what's called a jobs multiplier, and their argument is that gas workers go out and buy coffees and cars, and you have to build all these big gas plants and all of that kind of thing, and that creates additional jobs. But that kind of ignores that nurses and doctors and teachers also go out and buy coffee, go out for dinner, buy cars, work in hospitals that are built by Territorian construction workers, work in schools that also need to be built and maintained and supplied, right? So they're viewing gas in isolation. If you use their 6 times, and often because their supply chains are so international and their workers are FIFO, they have less of a flow on to the rest of the economy. So if we use the gas industry's multiplier for all the industries in Australia, in the Northern Territory, the blue is the actual jobs that you saw on the previous, the scales changed a bit, but the blue represents those jobs. And if you applied it to all industries, which would have to logically for comparison, you end up with 6 times as many jobs as exist in the Northern Territory, right? So don't believe their indirect jobs nonsense. It's an absolute furphy. And the truth is that gas is that if you want to, if jobs is the outcome that you're after, gas is the worst thing that you can support, because gas is very highly capital intensive. It's, you know, it goes through pipes and machinery. It doesn't need very many people, so it doesn't employ very many people per unit of its economic output. So the gas industry, for every $1 million of output, the gas industry employs about 0.4 people, whereas education and training, etc., employ, you know, 10 to 15 people. So it's the worst industry to support if gas is, if jobs is what is the outcome you want. Now, you might have heard the Northern Territory government talking a lot about 13,000 jobs that would be supplied by fracking if we let fracking go ahead. This is a complete misrepresentation of the actual numbers, because it refers to modelling that the government undertook themselves, and what they're doing is they're conflating job years, so 1 year of work by one person equals a job year, with actual jobs. Everybody else would understand that if you said there'll be 13,000 more jobs from the oil and gas industry, you'd think there'd be 13,000 more people employed at any given time, right? But what they're doing is they're saying if 10 people work, if one person works for 10 years, that's 10 jobs. So the actual exaggeration, so you can see what the modelling actually says it's 500, it's about 550 jobs, but the government's saying 13,000, right? So it's an absolute misrepresentation of the figures. In fact, what the modelling also says is that all those 550 jobs are offset by job losses in other industries in the rest of Australia and the Northern Territory. So what they're saying is because the gas industry, and Rob will talk a bit about this, I think, that the gas industry employs, because they employ skilled workers, and skilled workers are in short supply, they draw people from other industries, and those other industries have spent years training those people up, and they lose their workers, and then they have to compete with the gas industry for staff, right? So it's basically, it's largely a displacement of jobs rather than creating new jobs. I just briefly want to touch on the other big justification that's used by the government and the gas industry. They say that we need the gas to supply, to basically keep the lights on, right? In the Northern Territory, but also on the East Coast. This is a breakdown of where Australia's gas goes, Australia-wide, right? That's LNG exports. That's the energy used to run those big plants like Inpex and Darwin LNG. And the blue is the gas used in Australia by the domestic market. So they use more energy running their export facilities than we use to keep the light for electricity generation in Australia. We don't have a gas supply problem, we have a gas export problem. And a lot of those exports is uncontracted gas that they're sending overseas at the expense of Australians so they can strangle supply, drive up costs and price gouge Australian customers. And then when that gas is sent overseas, the latest government argument is that because the government's kind of the government and the industry are a bit panicked because nobody really believes them on jobs or that they pay any taxes and royalties. So they say, well, we need the gas for our international trade partners for their energy security. Well, it turns out that Japan, so the blue is the amount of gas Japan imports every year, including from Australia, and the red is the amount of gas they export every year. So Japan is exporting more gas than they import from Australia. They're on-selling it. So this idea about energy that needed for international energy security is an absolute furphy. And the final thing I just want to touch on is the emissions. So the Tamboran export terminal that's planned for Middle Arm is a huge LNG export terminal. The first phase of it is 6.6 million tonnes, but then they're talking about ramping up to 20 million tonnes, which would be the biggest LNG export terminal in Australia. So the emissions from that are astronomical when you include the emissions when the gas is burnt overseas. So the blue bars here represent all the emissions, the annual emissions from all the coal power stations in Australia, and this column over here is the annual emissions from Tamboran. That's when it's running at 6.6 million tonnes. That's when it's running at 20 million tonnes. So it's the equivalent to building another 12 average-sized coal power stations. So the Australian government is telling us that they think climate change is a huge issue and that they're rolling out renewable energy to replace coal. But they're also subsidising a project that's the equivalent, that's going to have emissions equivalent to building 12 new coal power stations. Right? So it's absolute hypocrisy. Some people will benefit from gas in the Northern Territory, but 95% of people who don't work in the gas industry will get very little benefit, and many of them will be negatively impacted. Our health will be impacted, our environment will be impacted, and our climate will be impacted. I encourage people to speak to their friends. We've got a fact sheet that we've handed out there. Speak to people and just let people know how badly we are being ripped off by these companies, aided and abetted by our governments. Thanks very much. I'd just like to invite Rob to say a few words about the local impacts.
Thanks, Mark. Louise. Bit stunning, actually, isn't it? Some of that information I haven't seen before, and quite frankly, you sit there and think, why would any government or person decide this is a good idea? Based on science, based on the facts, based on what we've seen everywhere else. Why would they choose to take us down this pathway? Look on the bright side of that is that if that's the truth, and it is the truth, then surely with all these people, I think most we're on the same page here, that none of us here, I think, agree that this is a great idea, this pathway. I think that with all these motivated people backed up by this, it's a good place to start to try to change the course of the ship and feed this out to other people and see if we can get some better resolutions, because where that sort of meets reality is where you guys are. I think probably most people here probably lived here longer than I have. I've only been here for 15 years. We've run a business for 11 years. As Mark said, we run a tourism business, Global Ventures. We set it up at here primarily to do exactly this, in a space where the Northern Territory was known for its wonderful biodiversity, its environment, also its very strong Aboriginal culture up here, and everything else that makes it special. And it is, everyone that comes here thinks the Territory is something special. Having guided pretty much all around the countryside, I consider Northern Territory the lazy guide's dream, because you can go out, take them out bush, bring them back, and they think you're the best guy ever, right? You just got to let them not get eaten and they're fine, right? Like, seriously, we've been trading off that for years, to various degrees. That's literally that's how great the Territory is. And as we move forward, again, like we started 11 years ago, and the idea of sustainable tourism wasn't even really much of a discussion back then, never mind ethical tourism, and considering broad impacts on society and the supply chain and the whole circle of life. But that's where tourism's going, right across the country and internationally. Like when we go to international trade events, they always ask you, well, what environmental stuff do you do? What social stuff do you do? That's where the money is for tourism. That's where the demand is. And the Northern Territory is ideally placed for that, because we've got to be in bucket loads, right? Now, that's on one side of it, as the tourism industry's going in. It's a big employer, we all know. We all go for coffee, we all go, maybe the occasional tour event. But that's on one side, but at the same token, the government's here, the NT government, the federal government, trying to tell us that we can have our so-called sustainable tourism industry alongside, a petrochemical hub, the biggest industrial site in Australia. I can tell you now that's not going to work. I take people out regularly and I make a point of tormenting them by talking to everybody on the bus, right? They get to sit next to me and they think, oh shit, there's like people up in the front, and lucky you're not sitting up the front. All right, so the point is that you get people, you gauge people what they're saying and what they think. And nobody comes to Darwin thinking they're going to get a mouthful of VOCs or drive past petrochemical, all this sort of stuff. We've all been over Elizabeth River, over the bridge there, and how wonderful that is, particularly at sunrise, right? Like, that's just godsend like that. And forget the crabs that want to crawl into your pots as well. But that's what we're talking about, right? And so if we can't go past these places, or if we do go past these places, where is our sustainable tourism industry? Now, if we backtrack to what we've seen in the past, now, I assume that most people live through Inpex. Everyone sort of lived through Inpex, the whole construction, blah, blah, blah. I found it fascinating because, we're sitting at home and our business was just starting to go all right. Like, we're just starting to get some bookings and maybe we might finish the year with a bit of money in the bank rather than taking loans out and that sort of stuff. And all of a sudden the phone stopped ringing. There's no phone calls, like no bookings. It's like, well, what's going on? What have I done? And you go down and you go into the hotels and it's like, oh, sorry, there's no tourists in these hotels. We've all been rented out by the workers or, associated people or whatever it is. It's like, oh, surely that's not a big deal. That'll wear off. But of course, that went on for years, didn't it? And of course, we're still here, so you adapt and you move around and all the rest of it. It was tough. You guys all went through it. You try to go to a spot, maybe go to Berry Springs on a Sunday, and all of a sudden it's full of high-vis shirts, getting your gear off and drinking beer at 8 o'clock in the morning, smoking, throwing shit everywhere. That's what we're talking about. That's how it directly impacts on tourism experiences, for example, but just the cost of living. I think our rent went up by about, 30%, I think, $130 within about 6 or 9 months. So rents go up, your income goes down, your quality of experience diminishes. And then, of course, just driving around, the costs to run the business, just say vehicles or stuff, just little things like smashed windows or, longer, more fuel because you're stuck in traffic, whatever it happens to be. So there's all these sort of side impacts that affect it. And, of course, I think the one that stood out for me the most when we're still trying to run tours through this period was the tourists that were getting on our buses, and they'd pay thousands of dollars. They'd taken time off their busy life. They'd come up to the Northern Territory for their lifetime experience in the great untamed north. And they turn up and one couple asked me if it was Mardi Gras. And I'm like, what do you mean Mardi Gras? And they're like, oh, because everyone's wearing their high-vis orange and yellow and all the rest of it down the street. And I'm like, oh, that's disgraceful. It's like, oh my God, right? I said, no, they're just the workers, that sort of stuff. So these people paid money. And then they got to go to restaurants, right? And they sit down next to these two high-vis wannabe Mardi Gras goers. And all they've got to listen to is how horrible Darwin is because they're away from their family and all this sort of stuff. And it's like, just that vibe. So the impact of this type of industry is not just about, the worst part is the health. The worst part is the whole, the unfairness of it all. But the subtleties of it that seep into the way we live. And I was just listening to all the stuff that you guys were saying. I'm quite shocked. I thought, shit, how can I even talk after that? I'm too shocked, actually. Anyway, I'm thinking to myself, and I love my children, right? I love my children. I throw it out there to start with. But if anyone's ever had a kid, right, and they say, oh, having a baby, fantastic, all that sort of stuff. And I remember when we decided to have a child, okay, we said, yeah, we're ready. The business is right. We're ready to have a kid, and we're going to have a kid now, and we're going to go forward together, and this is going to be our life, right? Well, it's not like that, is it? It's like that life ends, doesn't it? It ends right there, right? The first time that little squeal, and all of a sudden there's another life. It's over there somewhere, right? And that's the one you now lead for the rest of your existence, if you love your kids, right? So I equate this, what the government and everyone's trying to do here is jam fossil fuels down our throat, is take a society, take a lifestyle, take a place in the world which still has some of the best marine environments and everything else. It's such a vibrant place. They want to take that and they're trying to try and tell us we're going to have this horrible, ugly devil child called the fossil fuel industry. We're going to crap that one out and we're all going to hold hands and move forward on the same straight line. What a load of shit. So this is what I see. So in my mind, I'm thinking, maybe we just need to put it into context. Okay, we're all converted already, right? We do need to get other people on side. We need to make it real. Tell people how this does affect their everyday lives without getting preachy about it because, pretty much it makes sense not to do this. There's a whole heap of other options out there. Recharging the Territory is one. Those full brain people come up with ideas. So it's not necessarily let's go no, no, no. Let's go no because we've got other options. So if, as a group, we're out there, we're going, okay, we don't like this. Let's start thinking about what we can do. How can we improve this? When people say, yes, but it does this. Yeah, but hey, we can do this instead. Give them hope of a better future doing something else. And let's not just go bad devil child. It is bad devil child. I don't want nothing to do with that devil child. But let's do that. And I'm hoping that our business can keep going forward. Because, quite frankly, you know, if it doesn't, 10 years from now, when it's the, you know, billowing VOCs happening over there in the coastline, I've got no interest in subjecting my family to that. Simple as that. Thank you.
Great, thanks Rob, that was great. And Louise, we're very happy to take questions from people, if you'd like, if anyone's got any questions.
Mark,
Great.
about the future of the economics of this stuff.
Yep.
Really concerns me. When I was working with the small business centre here, a lot of small businesses in Darwin are really concerned with the handle they have.
Can people hear Graham? No. Graham, do you come down and... Oh, we've got a mic there. Okay.
Sorry. So the question was about the economics of this and what happens next, because when I was working at the Small Business Enterprise Centre, a lot of small businesses are really concerned about the fact that we're hanging all of our options on this coat hook called gas. So going back a couple of years, the gas industry was in real trouble price-wise, especially fracking, and then Mr Putin did his stunt in Ukraine and the gas price has gone through the roof. So if you look at the graphs from the International Energy Agency, it was almost bottomed out before that happened. So just recently we've heard two really key facts. One is Korea, which is one of our major export targets, has just cancelled some gas import facility builds because they don't believe they're going to need the gas anymore. You've already shown us that Japan is on selling gas. We've also seen recently that China's already hit its 2030 renewable energy target 6 years early and is massively investing in renewables. So my question really is, what's the likelihood over the next 5, 10, 15 years that the gas we make in Australia is going to be able to be sold to anybody?
Yeah, good question, Graham. So, look, fossil fuels are on the way out. You know, it's like landlines and beta videos and, analog photography and all of that kind of thing. So it's on the way out because it's ridiculously expensive and it's actually difficult to do. You've got to build massive infrastructure, offshore rigs, you've got to frack vast areas, you've got to, steamroll everyone, then you've got to export it, it's really dangerous. And renewable energy is now so much cheaper, so it's on the way out. But they're desperate, but these companies, it's not driven by the long-term economics, right? And the reason is that if you're the CEO of one of these big companies, you're not sitting there thinking, what's the gas industry, what's demand going to be in 10 years, right? You're not thinking that. You're thinking, how can I increase my reserves and how can I put more reserves into production? Because that's what my corporate bonuses depend on. That's the expectation of our shareholders that I increase production and get more and explore and get more reserves. So it's driven by it's kind of driven more by desperation than it is long-term planning. And my concern is, for instance, fracking in the Territory is ridiculously uncompetitive. Like, it couldn't possibly work. It could not possibly be commercial. Unless you convince the government to give you a couple of $1 billion and get them to build your infrastructure for you, right? So these people have these licence areas, and those licence areas have an economic value, and that economic value increases the more approvals you get, the closer you get to production. So they're just going to go hell for leather to get as much approved as possible. The infrastructure will be built, right? And these companies will go broke and they'll sell to other companies who they'll absorb costs and other companies will buy them. They'll go broke and you end up with vast amounts of infrastructure all over the Territory that isn't maintained properly. There's cost cutting all over the place, and the costs of all of that and the rehab get socialised, and we end up paying for that as well. That's how it works. It is not driven by long-term planning about gas demand, because that is undoubtedly falling and there's undoubtedly a gas glut. It's driven by desperation and short-term thinking by a handful of very greedy people, but also people who are locked into a kind of a structural thing of kind of being forced to do that by the setup that we've got.
Thanks, Mark. Just a question. When you talk about them paying no royalties or essentially barely any tax, the average punter hears that and thinks that can't possibly be true. Like, why would the Australian government allow this to happen if we're not getting anything for it? How would you respond to that?
Yeah, it's actually a problem. Like, it's absolutely true, and it's not, you know, it's kind of hidden in plain sight. But I guess the gas industry just has a very big megaphone, and they sort of drown us out a bit in saying that. But I think people get it when I talk to them. So if the question is, how does this happen? Why does the government do it? I would describe it as a cargo cult mentality, basically. I think that's the thing that underlines it. So you get these people in government and they think their entire focus, you have whole departments in government and politicians, their entire focus is getting it approved, because they think if Darwin gets a big shiny LNG plant, like this really big thing, it's worth billions of dollars, you know, getting that, I mean, it has to be fantastic, doesn't it? It's worth billions of dollars. This company's prepared to come and build us, and you know, and they're promising us all this stuff. So they're entirely focused on getting it approved, and they forget to do the bit about, well, how are we going to make money out of it ourselves, right? They're just literally not focused on that. And that's what I kind of mean. It's kind of a cultural cringe and a cargo cult mentality. And these companies are very good. Like, they spend a lot of money on PR and lobbying and marketing. That's what Australian energy producers are there to do. These companies make, you know, billions and billions of dollars every year, and they lobby government at every level. So they're just really, really good at it. And every time the government wants to make a change to taxation or anything like that, they have a consultation. And the gas industry just rings around them in the consultation. It's kind of embarrassing. You know, so it's a whole mix of things, and that's got us to the point where the gas industry is just, you know, where we're just giving the gas away and getting nothing in return. Now, I should say, not every country is as stupid as Australia, right? Qatar, for instance, and Norway get many times the return on their resources as Australia. So they're doing terrible damage to the environment, I've got to say, but they're making a lot of money from it, and their citizens are getting very, very rich. But the Australian policy makers are just no match for the gas industry.
Thank you. Hello, my name's Janie here. My concern is the conflicts of interest in the NT government. For example, in 2017, Dragoman Proprietary Limited, which is former NT ALP Chief Minister Paul Henderson, Andrew Liveris, Dow Industries for Obama, Robert Hill LMP, and Simon Cream, who's now deceased. $100,000 grant from the government to do a report on Middle Arm, very secretive. I attended the Middle Arm Senate inquiry, and a lot of interesting information came out of that, and yet Eva Lawler called it a circus. It was not a circus, but we have these conflicts of interest and abuse of power between these politicians and what's happening on level 5 and in Canberra, and they went down and they got $1.5 billion approved by Morrison, and now Albanese is following Morrison. So how do we stop this influence of these ex-politicians and powerful brokers that are not sharing information and doing these deals for self-interest?
Yeah. Look, I guess in the end the answer is you vote, you know, and along the way you have to make sure you tell as many people about this as possible. So I can't talk about those specific examples, but it is outrageous the way former Australian energy ministers go straight from jobs where they were basically responsible for policies around LNG exports and coal, etc., walk straight out of that, energy ministers, into jobs for those exact same companies, cushy jobs for those exact same companies. These consultants who do the work for the gas industry are just totally PR tools of the gas industry and the coal industry, and there's you know, there's so many examples of conflict of interest. It's absolutely terrible. But in the end, you know, our job is to make as many people aware of these things as possible, and to encourage people to vote accordingly. And I think, look, the way I think of it, it seems really hard from a distance to see how you change this kind of things because it's so ingrained. But what I would say is that the power of the gas industry in particular is very precarious, because other industries, say the iron ore industry, they actually employ a lot of people, right? And they pay a lot of royalties. You know, they actually have real power based on a real, you know, things that they provide that Australia would struggle to do without. The gas industry doesn't do any of that. They get the gas for free, they don't pay any tax, and they hardly employ anyone, right? So they're like the Wizard of Oz. They have to keep peddling and keep the sound and light show going with their PR and advertising all the time, because when people hear about what's actually going on, they become laughable. So I would say, you know, we just need to get out there and talk to as many people as possible and explain to them how badly we are getting ripped off. And I know when I tell people about some of this stuff, people are outraged and angry, okay? And it's not just people who, you know, who already kind of agree or have environmental concerns. Everybody is outraged and angry by the way we are being ripped off by the gas industry, and those conflicts of interest are part of it.
Dr. Woodward, could I ask you, you watched the Senate inquiry quite closely. What do you think of what came out of that and what it means for the community?
The Senate inquiry was really, really important for our community because we were able to put forward questions to government departments and industry to actually get some of the answers that we needed, some information that would have been very hard to extract. And so what we discovered was the things I was talking about with Inpex. We also, there were a number of presentations by scientists, doctors, regarding the health impacts, which I think aren't necessarily well known. People kind of think of gas as being this innocuous thing that, you know, looks pretty when it comes out of your cooktop, but actually, you know, it's really, really harmful. And so we're able to get that on the public record. It was really interesting hearing the Chief Health Officer speak on a panel with the government. She admitted that this was going to be hazardous in terms of the fossil fuel component of middle arm, and that was really important. I was quite shocked to hear our Chief Minister say that we all had to accept this industry because it was going to pay for our schools and our hospitals, and I have to admit that I was trying to maintain my composure at that time, because I work in the hospital here and I know how under-resourced we are. Particularly, you know, frontline services have been starved for many, many years, and the arrival of Santos and Inpex has certainly not helped that situation at all. So I certainly didn't believe a word of that. And it really was quite stark, the difference between what the gas industry was saying. We basically had Joel Riddle from Tamboran tell David Pocock that all the health studies from Harvard and Stanford and all these other amazing institutions were all wrong, and that fracking was perfectly safe. And I actually looked up the study that he referenced, and it was basically a modelling of air quality if every single bit of technology and regulation, everything was applied to an LNG industry, and it wasn't real. It was just modelling, whereas all the studies that David Pocock was talking about were all real people who are being affected. And I guess what I'd say is a lot of those studies are from the United States that has better regulations than we do of their industry. So in the United States, they get into a lot of trouble if they release more than 250 tonnes of VOCs a year. Inpex released 11,000, and there wasn't even a slap on the wrist. Their licence, which is what we discovered in the Senate inquiry, allows them to release whatever they want. There is no obligation for them to reduce their VOC emissions, and that is just frightening as a doctor. So I'm getting off the question. Yeah. So I could go on forever.
Yeah, so thanks very much, the three of you, for your presentations this evening. Rob especially, that was hilarious. Just wanted to pick up on something that you were saying, how we need to talk about the alternatives. And I was wondering if we should be doing more of that, and particularly because it addresses the issue of jobs, which is, you know, the big thing that the fossil fuel industry keeps pushing. I mean, in the States, two of the fastest growing job sectors are solar panel technician and wind turbine installer. So, you know, it seems like something we could be doing more on. What do you reckon?
I agree. Yeah, for sure. Like, again, I guess what I've seen, again, just where I've taken that sort of position on, is when we started our business 11 years ago, primarily the objective was to take people out on tours, to inform them of some of the issues that you face, these natural areas that they face, right? And some of the threats, but also balance that out against the positives, right? To try to get them to come away from that loving the day, loving the shore, loving the waterfalls, but understanding that there's all these threats, and getting them so motivated by the whole experience. It's like, oh, I'm now empowered by knowledge, I'm motivated by the empathy I've built through the day, I'm going to do something about that, right? And that's what we've been trying to do. But to be fair, the success rate, it's very hard to measure that to the point of zero, ability to measure really. And I had a lady say to me one day when I was getting a little bit despondent, and she said to me, you know, Rob, you don't have to change people from here to here, right? You don't do that. All you need to do is start the journey, put them from here to here, and then trust that there's someone next door that's going to take them from here to here, and then from here to here, and then here to here, right? You can't see these people, but you've got to trust that there's there. And so what I can say about that, and then another guy come on, they said that he doesn't spend his life saying no to stuff. He spends his life saying yes to stuff. He finds alternatives, and when he sees something that he doesn't like, he says, okay, what can we do differently, or how can we make that better? So when a topic comes up, he says that, not, oh, that's terrible. He says, yeah, but that's the benefits and pros of that. But have a look at this idea. So what I say to jobs for the future and different pathway, I honestly 100% believe that if we dedicate even a fraction of our resources, both time, effort, money, and I guess will, towards picking an objective. You know, the objective being a harmonious, I know, utopia sort of thing, like literally a healthy place in 50 years. You know, based on this, we picked that and we actually worked together to do it. I think we can come up with solutions. Again, I referenced the recharging the territories there before. I'm not saying everything in that was carved out of gold. Like, I don't see everything as a solution, but it's a step, right? It's a talking point. So I agree. I think that we should. I think we can. And the overall, all I've heard today, really all I've heard, is that there are solutions. There are solutions. It's like, even those horrible graphs tell us that that's ridiculous. But there are solutions. What is it? Vote. Or go out and talk to people. Or do this or do that. There are solutions. And that's what you've got to hold on to. That there are solutions, even though it's dark. And just keep charging forward. That's it.
I just, so I absolutely agree. We should be encouraging sustainable tourism, renewable energy, energy efficiency, looking after nature, you know, looking after people's health, all of those things, and they will all provide jobs, all extremely important. But sometimes there's an assumption when we talk about solutions, people think, well, we need something to replace the gas industry. We need something to replace all the income and jobs from the gas industry. What I'm saying is if you got rid of the gas industry, you don't lose jobs, right? They hardly employ anyone, and if they cease to exist tomorrow, because they're currently crowding out jobs in other industries through poaching people from, you know, tourism and agriculture and manufacturing, etc. They're currently crowding out other jobs, so other industries will naturally expand. So absolutely, I'm 100% supportive of developing new clean industries and doing great things like that. But the gas industry, we don't have to fill some big hole that would be left by the gas industry, right? Because they're not giving us anything at the moment. So I think we should always bear that in mind. In fact, the other thing I'd say, just to add to that briefly, how it works with the gas industry, right? Industries always go up and down, right? But usually they kind of go up and down organically, like they have, they gradually build up their workforce, and other industries decline, etc. It's not what happens with the gas industry. The gas industry comes to town, the next day they need 4,000 workers. They don't train them, they poach them from other industries, put them on for a couple of years. Those other industries are thrown into turmoil because they lose their staff and they can't compete with the gas industry for labour. So they're taking all the skilled labour. That lasts for a couple of years and then they sack everyone because the operational workforce is about a 20th of the construction workforce. Right? So it just caused massive disruption to the rest of the economy, and nobody really benefits except the gas industry and a few real estate speculators. That's how, and a few people with contracts for the gas industry. But the other 99.5% of us, we don't get anything out of it. So I just want to caution about having that kind of internalising that assumption that we somehow need to replace the gas industry.
And I'd just like to add something to that as well. You know, there's often this assumption that we need these big projects to power our economy. I drive a car that is fully electric, that has a huge battery that can power my house for 2 or 3 days. That is technology that exists right now. The only reason I can't do that and get off the grid is because the Northern Territory government won't allow me to. And so imagine everyone drives cars. Imagine if they all had batteries that could discharge into the grid. We wouldn't need the gas industry at all. And also we wouldn't need huge big projects either. Everyone would have energy security because you control your own energy, you provide your own energy. And that's just one example. And so we have all the technology right now. We don't need gas.
We've got the question here. We'll go with this question and then you go from
Yeah, we'll absolutely answer your question, but there's just somebody else waiting in the meantime. That's okay, we'll get to you.
Thanks to the panel. I'm Kamaljeet Sangha from Charles Darwin University, and I work a little bit in ecological economics space, looking at the economics of natural systems. So thank you for providing overview, Mark. This is like, you know, looks like how stupid we are. You know, it's not that we are losing our resource, but we will be paying for the loss. Yeah. And to me, just 2 main points. One is that if we could ask the Northern Territory government how much money they pay in subsidies and how much money they get, so that we can get a real picture that can tell us, is Northern Territory getting anything out of it? The second point is that over time, us or our future generation will be paying for the loss. that's happening now? And what will be the cost of that loss, which will be millions of dollars, and we don't account for that. So health is one that, Louise, you've been highlighting that very nicely, and we are all paying the cost for that. But in the future, there'll be a lot more cost for not just health, for many other services that we might lose over time. And I wonder, where can it take us? And I just can't believe that we are doing this.
So in terms of, what the question of what do we get out of it, that's really easy to do because we just go to the Northern Territory budget and we're getting $2.6 million out of it, which is virtually nothing. So that's pretty clear. In terms of the subsidies, huge amount of subsidies, like there's at least $2 billion for Middle Arm. And also Power and Water Corporation buy vast amounts of gas that the Territory doesn't need and then tries to on-sell it, and they see renewable energy, they've said this, they see renewable energy as a risk to being able to sell their gas, their excess gas that they bought that we can't use. So somehow they can't manage to hook up a bunch of solar power stations that are already built, and as Louise says, they can't, figure out the grid so you can put energy back into it. So, it's an absolute debacle. People all around the world are able to sort these things out, but somehow we can't in the Territory.
Mark, we're running short on time. I think we've got time for one more question, but while we tee that one up, did you just want to answer the question around running a hospital on renewable energy?
Yeah.
Or Louise as well.
And heavy industry. Yeah. Yeah, no, fair question. So a hospital's pretty easy, right? Because renewable energy, even with, and this is not seriously debated, renewable energy with battery backup or energy firming is as reliable and far cheaper than gas. Gas is an extremely expensive way to generate electricity. Right, very, very expensive, and renewables is far cheaper even when you count the cost of transmission, of electricity transmission and firming power, which is backup batteries to make sure you've got the power 24/7. And that's, and I'm summarising CSIRO, an Australian Energy Market Operator, research and data there. So there's no problem with that. Gas also, you should remember that gas is really unreliable. Like the Territory paid billions of dollars annually for gas from ENI, and then it stopped working. They didn't have any gas, right? They had to scramble and start getting gas from Santos, and so there's those issues as well. Yeah, yes. So yeah, no, understand. Now, heavy industry actually is a bit difficult to do without gas. Like you can do without gas, you need to electrify, but you have to, it's expensive to do because you have to basically rebuild plants largely to run on electricity rather than gas. Once you do, it's way cheaper, right? These companies would be saving money every year, but for some industries, it's harder than others. But it's not really a problem because we, as you saw, we export, in the Territory, we're exporting, 95% of gas in the Territory is exported, most of it uncontracted. So you just need to take a tiny bit of that and you can cover all the industries where alternatives are more difficult. So there's just oodles of gas. You need to prioritise it for those industries that would struggle to change over quickly enough because it's expensive. But for something like a hospital, electricity produced with renewable energy and backed up by batteries does the job entirely at a much lower cost. Yes. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I'll just, yeah, look, I'd say to that, you know, that's why, and this is happening all over the world, right? So there's South Australia, for instance, runs almost entirely on renewable energy. So you have grid scale batteries that back up wind and solar, and you have reliable energy 24/7, and they export energy to other states. So you do it, so it takes time, but you basically build renewable energy quickly, and you put in transmission lines where you need to, and you have battery storage, and you do it throughout the grid, and that will supply electricity as reliably or more reliably than fossil fuels at a far lower cost. And that's what we refer to when we're talking about a transition, and that's happening in parts of Australia and all over the world. Unfortunately, it's not happening in the Northern Territory, and it should be.
Okay.
No, thanks for a great question. Thank you.
And Kununurra is powered 100% by renewables by Lake Argyll, and they run a hospital. And so, yeah, there's lots of different ways to run renewables.
On a slightly different tangent, regards running the voice of change and communities of... sorry. I'm a local artist, and I've got a great deal of work and sculptures regards no fracking and other environmental issues that are sitting in my shed. If anyone has a public venue, a cafe or somewhere who like an anti-fracking scarecrow, they're just, you're welcome to them, because they're not doing anything good for me in my shed.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Perhaps we have time for one more?
Yeah, I think so.
Is there another question in the room?
Hello. Thank you so much for the presentation tonight. I've learnt a great deal. I don't really know a lot about the economy, so I don't know if this is a stupid question, but the comment that Eva Lawler made about needing to export gas in order to run the hospital and things. I'm training to be a doctor. I'm really worried about working in an under-resourced hospital. Do you have to export something? Could we export solar energy, or could you explain that to me? Do you understand what I'm trying to ask?
I understand what you're saying. Yeah, so there's an idea that a country needs to export stuff and get money from overseas, and we need to export stuff. So Australia, we export a lot of stuff, and gas is one part of that. But the idea that we export gas and then the money comes back to us is untrue. Because as I said, Territorians and Australians are not exporting the gas. A handful of multinational oil and gas companies are. So when Inpex gets the gas and exports it overseas, the cheque goes from the Japanese power station to Inpex headquarters, right? And it never comes to Australia. And they send a bit of money over here to pay a few workers, right? So even though the gas is sold for a lot of money, we don't actually get any benefit from that unless we tax it, which we're not, unless we make them pay for it, which we're not, or unless they spend it here and they spend a tiny fraction here. So the real industries, Australia is a modern service economy like every other economy. The health sector that you're going to be working in employs 25 times more people than the gas industry in the Northern Territory. And it's higher than that in other states. And industries like health and education and the public service are the drivers of our economy. We are a modern service economy. And the idea that we can't be a modern economy unless we export gas is entirely without foundation.
We pay for our hospitals. Us here, taxpayers, we pay for our hospitals, not the gas industry.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just, so I'll make one last comment on that. I mean, we did a bit of work recently. Australian nurses pay more tax than the gas industry in Australia. Australian teachers also pay more tax than the gas industry in Australia. Retail workers pay more gas than the gas industry in Australia. So Louise is absolutely right. The gas industry aren't building hospitals, right? The gas industry buying yachts for their executives, right?
The gas industry are filling hospitals.
Filling
with
hospitals.
All the harms they cause.
And ordinary Australian workers are paying to build hospitals and schools and everything else, not the gas industry. And thank you for that question, and thank you everybody for all of your questions. So, and I hope if I sort of kind of push back on certain ideas, it's I really appreciate the questions, but I'm trying to make the argument. So, and I'd just like everybody to thank. I'd like to thank everybody for coming along and listening. It's been really great and some really great questions. And I'd like to thank. I'd like everyone to thank Louise and Rob for coming along. And also Alice and the ECNT people for all the help they've given us, and my colleague Noah for coming up and helping out as well, and for the rest of the Australia Institute crew, because they're all working behind the scenes, doing a fantastic job to do the research, put together those fact sheets you've got on your seats, which I think are really great, sending us up here, organising all of this. So a lot of work goes behind the scenes, and I'd encourage people to support the Australia Institute if you appreciate our work. But so thanks everybody, and a big thanks to our speakers. All right. Time for a drink.